Hi, we're Skyping in today with Greg Baxter, the Global Head of Digital Strategy for Citi. How are you doing today, Greg?
Hi, David. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Today, we see disruptive trends emerging like digital cryptocurrencies, peer-to-peer lenders, robo-advisors. What is Citi doing to ensure it remains competitive in the middle of all this disruption?
It's a great challenge and a great question about what does a bank or what does an incumbent do to remain competitive. And I need to break it into two halves. One is what I would call outside in, and then I'll come back to inside out. So outside in, first of all, we need to open up our banking world. We simply do not have the capital, the capacity, or the capability to do all of the innovation that customers are going to want, or the rate of test and learn that's required to find those that will work. So we're building out APIs, private APIs. Some of those will become public APIs over time so that others can innovate on top of our platforms and bring ideas to it. And an example of where we do use that, we run a thing called the Citi Mobile Challenge, which is the largest bank-led fintech accelerator in the world. And we had about 3,500 companies apply or ideas that have been passed by Citi, and we've got about 20 in incubation at the moment. But that's a way not only to come up with new ideas, but to engage different people and different ideas and become relevant to the ecosystem. We also invest in a number of companies and have a strong venture group. We've invested in about 30 companies. Some of them are robo-advisors. We have partnerships with lending companies. We have a number of experiments and investments in blockchain space. But broadly, data, security, financial technology, payments and commerce are the main areas that we look for investment in. The second component to this is around inside out. I do not believe that innovation can be outsourced. I believe it has to be a core competence of a company. And so whilst all of those things I mentioned around bringing innovation into the organization are great, you also need to learn how to innovate internally. And we've put in place a number of initiatives centered around what we call a growth operating system. The first principle for that is how do we bring a more venture capital approach to resource allocation to new ideas that would normally get killed in a large organization. And secondly, how do we encourage a more entrepreneurial mindset within the organization? And so we're running a number of initiatives through that internally as part of a larger culture and leadership change within Citi.
Some say banks are under attack by young innovators and new entrants. Accenture famously called it a shoal of piranha. What would you respond to that?
I think the most important thing to realize is that in an environment that's changing so rapidly, that defense is a really bad strategy and you need to go on the offense. And this is as big an opportunity for incumbents as it is for innovators. Every single technology that's available to an innovative company is as available to an incumbent company. And when we looked at disruption in the past, what we saw was that companies that adapted, incumbents that adapted were more profitable once they transferred through that disruption, as were the innovators that got scale. And so my advice to companies would be to try to aggressively drive innovation on top of the product sets that they have. And in comparison, the innovators are going to be driving for industrial scale. And I think there is a race towards which one gets there first. The advantage that big corporates have is that they already have hundreds of millions of customers. In Citi's case, it's over 100 million customers, large 15% of the world's FX, $3 to $9 trillion every day in global flows. So we have all of the core capabilities and the industrial strength and coverage. The real challenge for us is to learn to innovate on top of that. And as I said, I think that needs to be an offensive strategy to partner with companies, innovate inside out and outside in. There's no question that the future is not going to be predicated on the past. And I think understanding who you want to be in that future is critical. And it's not about having envy of startups. It's about looking at your core capabilities and working out how do you build on them. And I believe that industrialists need to learn how to innovate. And it's the same existential challenge that innovators face in needing to industrialize their business models. And if you look at the success of digital-only banks so far, it's actually been fairly small. And if we look at the total disruption, digital-driven disruption in new business models in North America consumer market today, we estimate it to be about 1%. So it's still fairly small, and it's very hard to scale at the level to be competitive. And so I think what we're going to see going forward is some of the big companies that learn to innovate are going to do extremely well, as are some of the innovators that learn to capture scale and get momentum. The other observation I would make is that a lot of the innovation to date has been in what I would call the last mile of customer experience. And our estimate is that about 70% of all venture funding has gone into that last mile of customer experience. I do expect that there'll be continued competition for owning the customer, but some of the other innovation that hits the other layers, like true product and service innovation or innovation on the platforms that underpin financial services, I think we're seeing a lot more partnership there, because you need the scale, the ubiquity, the trust framework and the compliance framework in order for those products and those platforms to work. So I expect to see much more investment going into partnership opportunities and much more collaboration at those middle levels of product and service and of platforms, whilst I still expect to see quite some competition in terms of who can win the customer experience.
What you said about the last mile of the customer experience is really interesting. Can you expand on that point? Unpack it a little for us.
Yeah, the last mile of customer experience is really the touch points that a customer has with their financial services products. And in some cases, you don't really want the bank to be coming with you. And Uber's a great example. When you climb into a car, you don't want to pull a bank in there with you. You want the payment to disappear into the background. And so a number of these journeys do actually belong to the customer and to other providers. And banks need to be behind that and just supporting and enabling that. And what we see is a lot of the innovation is in trying to drive those new experiences for customers. It requires far less capital and less compliance and regulatory approval to innovate on top of the products and frameworks and regulatory system that already exists. And that's what I call that last mile of customer experience, the ability to engage the customer in their journey and the touch points that you have with customers. Thanks, David. Enjoyed the conversation and hope the rest of the class goes well.